I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. Joining me today is Matt Grace, author of God Doesn't Relapse: Sex, Drugs, and the Life That Almost Killed Me. More than 48 million Americans live with substance use disorder, and relapse remains a common and often deadly reality for those seeking recovery. While statistics illustrate the scale of the crisis, they rarely capture its personal toll. While Matt Grace offers an unfiltered account of addiction through lived experience, he pulls readers into the chaos of addiction with unflinching clarity, compulsive behavior, broken relationships, escalating consequences, and the psychological spiral that nearly killed him. He doesn't soften the damage inflicted on himself or others. Instead, he offers a stark human portrait of addiction, stripped of cliché or excuse. With more than 20 years of sobriety, a bachelor's degree in addiction studies with a focus on integrative healing, and over 10,000 hours mentoring individuals and families, he has become a trusted guide to both the highly privileged and the deeply overlooked. Welcome to the show, Matt. Nice to have you on today.
Thanks, Kathryn. It's always an honor to get to come on shows like this.
Okay, great. Well, first question, because as a social worker, I often hear this, and I've often heard this in the past, that many people just assume that addiction is a problem with willpower, and they are misinformed, obviously. So I want to start with that because I think that is a huge attitude, or an attitude that many people hold.
Yeah, I think it's important to articulate that my grandmother was an alcoholic. Her three siblings were alcoholics. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic who left the family during the Great Depression, and my grandmother had to drop out of high school to go to work. And so while trauma does play a role into addiction and recovery, I think people forget that I have the genetic predisposition, and that it really, whether I have willpower or not, I was predestined with my genetic disposition to, be an alcoholic.
So the issues. Let's talk about what the issue. Well, that's part of it, okay? That
Yes.
that genetic predisposition, but that's not all of it, is what you're saying, right?
Right.
So yeah, okay. So people, individuals, many reasons that I want to take maybe each one step by step, don't seek help because of shame being. Is that number one? I mean, that's a complex issue. They're ashamed of their behavior.
Well, I would actually say that we have to have an honest conversation. I mean, I've been volunteering in treatment centers for 21 years, specifically those that are state funded for people who are on Medicaid. Because I grew up in privilege, I think I have a responsibility, or I feel that I have a responsibility to give back to that demographic. There's a lot of people, shame does play a part in it, but sometimes people just don't want to stop as well.
Okay, you make an interesting distinction. Let's talk about that. Are there differences in the behavior of those who are privileged and those who are not?
Well, privilege can take it can take
When it
shape.
comes to, and I'm saying when it comes to having alcoholism or a drinking problem.
No, I think that the desire has to be there, but I talk about yes, there's as someone like myself who was privileged, I wouldn't have stopped using had my father kept paying all my bills, right? Like, where's the incentive to stop if my drug habit and my drinking is being supported by my father? Now, the what enabling looks like for the disenfranchised community is our parents that are driving their kids to bad neighborhoods so they can buy drugs and then shoot heroin in the car on the way home. And the parents think that they're helping them by keeping them safe.
So enabling takes a different form, but enabling is enabling. Is that what you're
Correct.
saying?
They may
Yeah,
not
okay.
have the same resources,
Yeah.
but it just manifests itself in other ways.
How does denial fit into all of this? Denial on the part of the person who has the addiction or who is addicted.
Well, that's a huge part. But why I wrote my book is not just the denial about the addict, but it's the families that have so much denial. And my father was my number one enabler, and in such a state of denial that everybody in my family pleaded with him to cut me off financially, and to wake up and look at what was happening in my life. He just couldn't accept that I was an addict, and he swept it under the rug. And so I'm asking families to embrace their loved one's addiction, not to be ashamed, and to start doing their own work, because if a family is going to recover, they have to recover together.
And that kind of enabling and denial, with the family and with your father, sometimes or all the time comes from the source of loving you, of just, do you think, is that part of it?
Yeah, 100%. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you said that, because I said that parents are loving their kids to death. My father didn't wake up with the intent of hurting me. He just loved me so much. He did the best that he could. And what I say about my book is that it's not an indictment of his failures. It's a testament to what happens when you love someone too much.
How does, okay, so it could be mom, dad, whoever it is who's the
Mhm.
enabler because they do love you. How do you approach, what does a family do? How does the family approach that person who's not able to really take a realistic look at what's happening to their, well, in this case, child?
It's very difficult, but my book is a part memoir and part case studies. Uh, Part of the case studies are in between each chapter about my life. They're italicized, and I illuminate the cases where the families did well and which ones didn't do well. And oftentimes it was either fathers or mothers that were able to kind of put old ideas aside, put their egos aside, and to start seeking their own help. And once they start to do their own work, then they can, whether it's through Al-Anon or family therapy, that there has to be some boundaries set in place.
Yeah. It's difficult for families, and obviously you talk about that in the book. Really difficult for families, parents to admit that we have a problem. And I think that now, even with the internet, and I talk about this like social media and stuff, it exacerbates that problem because we're all supposed to have this lovely little family and everybody's doing great and on and on and on, and perhaps even more so in a privileged family.
Yes. And I think that my father, he just wanted other people to think that I was successful. I think that's part of the reason why he kept propping me up. But he kept um, changing the goal line. As I mentioned, I used to be a TV reporter. I showed up drunk every day. I showed up drunk to most of the jobs that he got me, and he protected me often from being fired when that probably would have been the best thing to happen to me.
But he couldn't do it. So,
No.
yeah. So, at what point did everything change?
October 2nd, 2004. You see, I just want to say my mom recently passed away, and I found a letter that she had written to my father 30 years ago. It's incredible. My mom knew who I was from an early age, and she pleaded with my father to pay attention to my gambling debt, being kicked out of school, losing my driver's license, running up a 1-800-sex number. I mean, the letter had everything. And my father just said, I think that you're overreacting. And that's the dichotomy that I face, is that one parent sets boundaries and the other one blows through them.
Yeah, well, and that's your story, but as you're saying in the book, you've got many stories, right? Yours and many others, and the ones that were successful and the ones that weren't.
Correct. So I had one family where the father was, 4 homes, private jet, the whole story, and a Wharton grad, Harvard grad. And he sat down with me and he said, Matt, I don't know what to do. Please help me. And I worked with a lot of men like that, and they were just he wanted to see his family succeed, and he was able to put old ideas and beliefs aside. Then there were the parents who I facilitated an aftercare group with my former business partner, and there were 3 kids that were coming up that were showing up to the group that were high, and we told the parents, listen, it's not fair to the other kids, and we can't treat your kids need an inpatient setting. This is beyond our scope of help. This is an outpatient setting. But the parents refused to send them to treatment. And I think that we did the ethical thing and we said, you're not a good fit for our practice. And all 3 kids died in the same year.
Mm. What about men versus women? Because you've mentioned fathers, I guess. You mean your father, and then this Harvard, Wharton School graduate, et cetera, very successful. And then your mother's letter? Do you think that women have a better sense or are able to take a look back and have a more realistic approach to the problem in the family, to the addiction problem?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to have to go back and look at the data. I think it can be both, but because at least when you're dealing with privilege, it's the father who's the breadwinner and is in control of the money. And so a lot of the times it can be both, but yes, I mean, I see a lot of fathers. For instance, I just spoke to someone today. I had to ask this family to please stop calling me. Um, this man's son is a living in out west, no job, using drugs, and his dad just bought him a Porsche. And people are just like, what are you doing? Where's the lesson here, right? And there's so many kids that have financial debt now, and then pornography and gambling is another part of my story that kind of gets brushed aside to drugs and alcohol. But porn and gambling with the sports betting on kids' phones, it's wiping out a generation of young men.
Yeah, so addiction is addiction. I would
Hmm.
assume a little humor here. I mean, dad buys the Porsche usually, not mom. So maybe that. I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
it's just and you think so what sounds, a lot of families who might be listening who can't relate to addiction, they're like, what's mom and dad thinking? And so what might be simple to some families, as you know, as a social worker, you're dealing with people's own sickness in their own what's going on in their own spirit and then in their own mental capacity.
yeah. How do siblings fit into this picture?
Um, Yeah, I think a lot of siblings kind of get sick and tired of being pulled into, right? You also had, like, I was an underachiever. I had a failure to start, excuse me, failure to launch. And oftentimes parents just keep, digging and digging and digging and trying to keep rescuing and rescuing. And then there's the one sibling that's an overachiever or that's ambitious and that they don't understand, like you said, it's not willpower, it's a sickness. And I think that they get fed up. And I think that a lot of them feel alienated that all the attention is going to the other sibling for his addiction. And they kind of get brushed aside.
Yeah, and so what kind of I'm thinking about the relationship then that the siblings have, yeah, to the patient or the person who is addicted, the alienation, or you may get a sibling. I don't know if this has been the experience when you've interviewed all of the people of your families and stuff, but the other sibling who tries to be the parent and help the addicted sibling.
Yep. But I can tell you, since I started my social media about 9 or 10 months ago, I've gotten a lot of messages from siblings that said, thank you for your content. I've had to actually step away for my own sanity, my own children's sanity, and my own family. I've had to step away from trying to rescue my sibling.
So you've really engaged people. I think that one of the things that's very different about perhaps you and your book is that you talk about the real stuff. You don't sugarcoat all of these experiences. I mean, a lot of much of the literature, unless it's academic, is out there. How people overcame their addiction. What a wonderful story, and everything turned out great. Um, you dig into the real, I guess the real stuff, I guess I would call it, which I think is really important and for people to be able to identify with.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a brutally honest memoir. It's not easy to read, but I felt that all the stuff that I'm seeing on social media is it's people aren't revealing who they are or who they used to be. I think it's important for me to tell the stories that I do because I want to incentivize or inspire other people who may have been a low bottom drug addict or alcoholic and done criminal things and had the life that I did to feel comfortable coming forward and sharing their story with someone else.
So what do you say to people who say, okay, if I do all this, this is, I'm going to lose my job. I am not going to be able to get another job. I'm not going to get a promotion. How does this fit into the real world?
Yeah, we've come a very long way. And when I worked for a nationally recognized private practice in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, uh, we found that um, the employers are much more understanding of addiction than they used to be. And so one of the things, this is very common, when I was dealing with the breadwinner or a high earner, he'd say, "Oh, I can't leave my job." And so we would say, "No, we already talked to your employer or your coworkers, and they're supporting you, and we're going to pack a bag right now, and you're going to go into treatment."
And I would also think, okay, in Grosse Point is the upper echelons
Mhm.
of community or society, or that the employers themselves and other employees I don't want to use the word secretly, but they're also suffering from these kinds of issues, family issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And like I said, it's 2026. We have a long way to go, but we've still come a long way. And yet, to answer to your question, I don't have children, so maybe had I had children, maybe I wouldn't have been so honest and forthcoming. But I lost my virginity to a prostitute the same day I went to Auschwitz, with four survivors. My father filmed a documentary, and imagine what kind of experience that is. And all I did in my social media was I said, I'm asking fathers not to repeat this behavior. It got 2.4 million views, and a high percentage of men said that my dad was their idol. They wanted his phone number, and that I was an ungrateful son. So
That's
it
the
just kind
risk.
of shows you where we are.
Yeah, it does show where we are. So how do we move forward? I mean, obviously, your book, the work that you do, that's one way.
Okay, so there's
Yeah.
three themes to the book. One, I'm really trying to reach parents. I'm asking them to wake up and embrace their kids' addiction, right? You talk about shame. The addict has plenty of shame, but the family has so much shame. One of my friends died, and the family erased. It was like he never existed. No mention in the newspaper, no burial, nothing. And it's so I'm asking families to not be ashamed. So that's one theme. The next theme is service work and volunteer work. And it's something that you can implement into your life. So if you're struggling intertwining the concept of God into your recovery, and you're an atheist or an agnostic, one of the things I say is that you don't need to believe in God to make a pot of coffee, right? When I started to care about others more than I cared about myself, I started to get better. And I'm talking about meaning and purpose, not the Porsche and all the stuff that I bought to try to make myself feel better that didn't work. I'm talking about spending time one on one with another person who is less fortunate than I am. And the third thing is then the whole concept of God, and that service can be your higher power, right? So if someone is really struggling, they don't want to go to a 12-step program, they don't want to go to Dharma, or they're on a medically assisted treatment, right? That's a big thing. Trying to help someone else, if you do that on a consistent basis, you will be contacted by some form of a higher power.
What about relapse? Because that's a huge issue, our problem that one has to deal with. How does the individual and or the family deal with the addict who relapses?
Yep, great question. So I never advocate for families to cut their family members off, whether it's a husband or a son or dog, what have you. But in my case, right, so you can go to treatment and then you can send them again, and right, you don't give up. But I have to tell you that the only reason why I'm alive is because after 13 years of lying and stealing and pawning and not showing up from at my mom's house, I came home. I weighed 129 pounds. I disappeared on a 3-day crack and alcohol binge, and she started crying and sobbing and said, "Oh my God," because I looked like I was dying. And she said, "If you're going to die, it's not going to be in this house. Get out. I'm changing the locks." So in the beginning, I would say put all resources into trying to help that someone. But after 13 years, don't you think that mom and dad have the right to live a nice life? Because I hijacked everybody in my family. So at some point, I think it's okay to love someone from a distance. Yeah, maybe not throw them out into the street, but give them food. Now we're talking about obviously low bottom drug addicts who ring the doorbell for food, and maybe not cut them off completely, but do as little as possible.
What about lying and cheating? And lying, for instance, I know that, and I'm taking the next generation. Like grandparents sometimes get sucked into this whole dynamic of the parents will do, let's say, what you're doing or what you're recommending that your mother did after 13 years, 12 years. But what about then the grandparents continue to enable the addict? the
Oh,
grandchild?
another great question. Because I, like I said, we dealt with a lot of high net worth families, and one of this fam very wealthy. I mean, billions,
Yeah.
and the grandmother was the matriarch. And so this family had multi-generational mental health problems, not just drugs and alcohol, but bipolar disorder. I mean, it was a mess. So, be careful what you wish for. Right? On the outside, everybody says, "I wish I had that." But when you pull the curtain back and see what I have, so anyway, getting back to your
And I'm
point,
thinking about the Getty family.
yes,
They're an example. Yeah.
yes, and so um, this this grandmother was like, I think she was 88, and the grandkids who had substance abuse issues were calling her every day. And we had to put a blockade in because like your 88-year-old grandmother doesn't deserve to be held hostage by the grandkids. So yes, grandparents play a significant role, and they can enable too. I mean, I that's nobody's really talked about grandparents lately, so I'm glad you brought that up
Uh-huh.
because a lot of parents can't take care of their children, and then the grandparents have had to continue working almost to support their grandkids.
Yeah, so it's definitely, as you're describing it, it's an intergenerational problem. And of course, as grandparents continue, they live longer now. They're more engaged with their children, with their grandchildren, even great grandchildren. You're living to be, you mentioned this grandmother, 88 years old, right? Being
Yeah.
hijacked by her own grandchildren who probably also want to get the inheritance of the
Yes.
monies, I would assume. That's part of it too.
Yep. I mean, you're dealing with massive allowances, trust distributions. But I don't want to, I don't want to single out, I don't want to make this just about wealthy people because enabling comes in all forms. There was an article in the Detroit Free Press, which I was disappointed with about 3, 4 years ago. And it was a 3-page spread on how this mom was taking her kid to buy drugs and letting him shoot up in the car on the way home. And I think it's more common now, and I don't like it. I don't think that my mom should have had to witness me overdosing, giving me Narcan, and having to. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think a parent should have to watch their kid die over and over again and bring them back with Narcan? That's traumatic for a parent.
Yeah. The other thing is because and we're talking about the finances. Do you think that, I mean, wealthy parents have the ability to, or the kids, I say, if they have access to their own monies, trust funds, whatever it is, that they have money to buy drugs and to, get whatever they want for for a certain period of time, not forever, and that's an issue.
Yep. And so the most successful family that I worked with, their son had an American Express Black Card, and he was spending $30,000 a month.
Yeah.
Think about that number. And they came together and they basically said you can spend $5,000 to $7,000 a month. I mean that they corralled him and basically put boundaries in place. And he was living in a $5 million apartment and not doing anything except getting high all day. And so we took that was my most successful case as far as that kind of wealth. And then we took that case study and tried to implement it to other families where the kids had trusts. And there's always usually a trustee, right? And
Yeah.
whether it's an attorney or an uncle. And so we always recommended that, like, why is your brother going to get sober if he's getting 80 grand a month, right?
Right.
There's no incentive. And so the families that could corral the trust, not cut them off, but make make them have some skin in the game that they're going to have to demonstrate that. And I had to go through that. When my father died, my uncle was my trustee. And even though I had 11 years of sobriety, he wanted to see how I was going to handle it.
So family engagement is really important, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, everybody has to be involved.
Hmm.
All right, we only have like 4 minutes left, so maybe just take a little bit. Now, what's the other side? Families who are vulnerable families, not wealthy families. What would you say were what would be the main issues? Not the money, different issues, but as we said in the beginning, there are those who are enabling them. So, what are they doing, or what? Yeah.
Well, I would recommend, look, the most successful people in recovery are the ones who face licensing revocation, right? We're talking about pilots, lawyers, doctors, people who could lose their license. So I think that the number one thing where you can start if you don't have a lot of resources is to get a drug test. And you have to, if they're going to live with you, they have to take random drug screening for a year. Yep. And if they can't, and if they're imposing, if there's other kids in the house, right, who might come home and find a needle in their sibling's arm and they're dead sitting on the stairs, which has happened before, you have to protect your family. So, I would say drug testing, number one, and then um, service work and prayer. Really, it's like those are, they don't cost anything. And if they can get their kids to do some form of, implement some form of a purpose in their life, they have to have a job too, right? No, no sitting at home doing nothing. So I would say that the two most important things are a low stress job and a random drug screening.
Matt, so much information. I really appreciate it. So does the audience. And obviously there's so much more in the book. God doesn't relapse, sex, drugs, and the life after that almost killed me. So Matt, give us some platforms to go to for more information about you, your work, the book.
Yeah, so my website is mattgrace.com. If you need a referral, I don't work in the industry anymore, but people are watching my social media, so you can go to Matt Saving Grace for my social media. And if you need, I had someone contact me the other day if they know an interventionist, and I pair them up. So you can email me at hello@mattgrace.com if you need help. Tell me the state you're in, and I'll try to find you help or resources. And then my book, God Doesn't Relapse, comes out August 11th. And so if you could go to Amazon, you can pre-order it now.
Okay, so you have all the information, even though you're not in the biz. Is that,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, good. Go out, get the book. August 11th? That's
Hmm.
in just a few days.
It is.
Yeah, good luck with the book. Great talking to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is Susanna Marin, author of Palm Beach Confidential. Decades after Lucinda Barrows comes to Palm Beach, she has everything she set out to claim: a seat at every elite table and 3 stunning daughters raised in the shelter of privilege. Yet beneath the family's renown, Lucinda's life is in turmoil. Out of nowhere, her carefully constructed legacy is being threatened. While discretion is offered, the price is steep. As the sisters uncover what has the means to destroy the Barrows family, they become the mirror for the far-reaching consequences of a devious plan. Suddenly, they're forced to choose between their mother and the truth. Who will prevail and who will fall from grace? Susanna Marin is the author of many novels. As Susan Shapiro Barra, she has written 14 nonfiction books on women and gender, and has taught at Marymount Manhattan College and creative nonfiction at Sarah Lawrence College for actually over 2 decades. And she's been in the Wall Street Journal, New York Post, New York Magazine, and many more. Welcome to the show, Susanna.
Thank you for having me on, Kathryn.
Okay, you have written many, many books about women, okay, and gender. Let's talk about that. That as a, you talk about the gender divide. A lot of your books focus on that and women's position, obviously, in American society and their feelings about themselves in different roles. How does that relate to this book, the Palm Beach Confidential?
It definitely relates to it because my nonfiction, the 14 titles that you mentioned that I've written 14, have really looked at how women navigate a path in a very patriarchal contemporary culture in America. So I've investigated the role of wife, female rivalry, female infidelity, mothers and daughters, sisters, mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law, toxic friends, healthy friendships, all to see how women really feel versus the faces we wear. And of course, for those books, I interview a diverse group of women, usually between 150 and 200 per book. And these are anonymous interviews, and the women are, across all strata, level of education, earning power, race, religion, all across the country. And then what I've learned from listening to real-time women is that we really are very complicated and we are survivors. So I purposely chose Palm Beach for my Palm Beach novels, this series, because it's a very beautiful, elite, rarefied, privileged place. And yet, Kathryn, women have as many secrets and as many ways to prevail, get through, be accepted as anywhere else.
So the issues are the same, is what you're saying. I mean, whether even if this group or the Palm Beach Confidential, it's not about diversity, it's about the elite. But underlying all of this, the women's issues, the gender issues are the same, but they're played out differently in a different context.
Well, I think that women, based on my research, want to belong wherever they are, wherever they live, that female friendship is important, that being part of a group is very important to women. Women want to be wives. They're so often disappointed in the role. And female friendship is often about betrayal. So the Palm Beach works so well because we think in a capitalistic society that if we are placed in an area, a town, an island, as this is, where there is so much privilege and so much wealth, that everything will be fine. But it's not really ever quite fine for women. We are the good girls. We have been raised to put one foot in front of the other, to believe if we do the right thing, we'll get the right result. And my novels are dramatic, and they're about secrets, and they're about the truth.
Yeah. So I think that's true. And I think that people, I mean, getting back to the first thing you said, that if you only women and men too, but women in this case, if I only had all that money and I only had all that privilege, and if I only lived in Palm Beach or Nantucket, or everything would be fine. And that's not true. And I think,
And the other thing that really intrigued me about the nonfiction that I definitely applied to my fiction, I didn't mention it before, but I also did a study on the secrets women keep and why we lie for the cause, which is the behavior. And so Lucinda, the mother of these three daughters, very dicey adult daughters, she has a very deep secret, and that really is what drives the story. She's being threatened, and she has worked so hard to put the past behind her. But that isn't, as we know, always something we can pull off.
don't tell us the secret.
I will not.
We
But
don't,
but I
yeah,
will tell you that even as I was writing it, and as you said, I've written about these, enough books. I
yeah.
said to myself, I can't believe she did what she did. And I was writing it, and so I think that for women, acceptance is so important, belonging is so important. The judgments, we're also judged in Palm Beach. They're, judged, women are judged constantly. And, is she pretty enough? Is she wealthy enough? Is she popular enough? Does she dress well? But again, that's really applicable to so many different places we live in America.
Yeah, well, in politics, isn't that one of the issues? Women politicians, how do they dress? What do they look like? What's their voice like? On and on, right? Different
It's
standards.
it's so wrong and it's so unfair. But as I said earlier, we live and we will die in a patriarchy. And so one of the themes throughout all of my nonfiction and fiction is not just survival, but how do we get through? How acrobatic are we? And how do we reinvent ourselves? And why are the stakes often so high in our personal stories? And then women are so multifaceted and, in my opinion, so strong that we manage.
But then how do we continue to find ourselves in the situation that you've been describing? I agree with you. But are we going forward, or are we the same as our grandmothers were 2 generations ago?
That's such an interesting question. We could spend hours on that. The climate in the world today is, well, we all know about the trad wife, and we're looking at sort of old mores and tropes. And then we're also looking and still haven't achieved really, being equality, because if there was real equality, there would be equal pay for equal work. And that really transcends everything. So women are always striving, and we're not there yet, but the hope is that we're doing better. And surely, in circling back to the novel, Lucinda's daughters, one of her great frustrations is that her daughters don't just comply. She's turning 60 at the beginning of the book, and that's pretty amazing to admit you're 60 in a town like Palm Beach, or
Yeah.
right. So she had her first two children very early back in the Panhandle. So she has a daughter who's over 40 and a daughter who's
So
just
we're talking about, I'm interrupting because we're talking about someone who was born and raised in the Panhandle, which is the opposite of Palm Beach, right? Or it's,
And she worked very hard, and she
yeah.
was very strategic to get the family to Palm Beach. And she really reinvented herself. But she's still concerned, how, are you as good as your last mistake? And why aren't her daughters complying? Why don't, I'm sure many mothers say this too, why won't my daughter listen to me? And so the fact that her daughters each have a mind of their own is also very, very central to how this story plays out.
You talk about reinventing ourselves, women in the novel. And I'm thinking about how do we see men in the same situation? I mean, somebody like J.D. Vance, who grew up in Appalachia,
Right.
men are viewed as, boy, that they're self-made men. You don't talk about reinventing yourself. You talk about a man who becomes very successful and who came from meager environment, as someone who pulled himself up by the bootstraps, and it's a positive attitude, as opposed to women reinventing is not a positive kind of description, I don't think.
I would agree with you that women are held to a different scrutiny, that women have, this is why we're so multifaceted. This is why we go deep, because we have had to have so many ways to get through, to, as I said before, so many ways to get through, to be recognized, heard, seen, that we just have the skills that men in a patriarchy have been given so much. And you're right, it's not the same for men and women. So reinventing seems loaded when it comes to women, and it's not really applicable to men. And that's something, this is that really exists in this novel, is the sense of a very matriarchal family. The father died a while ago, and the business is run by Lucinda and one of her daughters, Caroline, the middle daughter. But she is absolutely capable beyond anything she would almost admit, because the judgments against not just about women, but really almost against them.
Yeah. Judgments, yeah, about women, and I would say also against them. You as a novelist and a teacher or a professor, you're also interacting with a younger generation, right? So I'd be interested in what's their response. Well, first of all, to your novels, and a novel like Palm Beach Confidential.
Well, I haven't taught at Marymount in a while. The school was bought recently or merged with Northeastern. So things have really changed there. But for the 24 years I was there, I found my students very, very supportive and really interested. They liked having a professor who was, would say, come to my book launch, and very interested in the themes, because these themes are something we talk about in a classroom that's a gender studies room. So we're really talking about, how do women truly feel? How do women achieve? How do women get seen? All of these themes. And then the idea of family systems is something you talk about in a gender classroom too, often, at least on my syllabus. And this is really about family systems. We have Lucinda, the matriarch, and her two older daughters who are very close in age. And then they have a sister, Raleigh, who's really the wild card, and she's much younger. So she's 10 years younger than Maribel, the eldest, and 8 years younger than Caroline, the middle sister, and she is the mascot. So while the older two sisters are completely competitive and not always fair to each other, when it comes to Raleigh, she's forgiven a lot of the time. And then, no spoiler here, but not all of the time.
And also, does that, we can talk about the different, I guess, generations, right? Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, and then I guess there are two groups below that. I mean, that you would find those kinds of differences that you're talking about in the book with the three sisters.
Yeah, exactly. Because what we're looking at is the expectation, sometimes pressure in some families, in some social circles, but definitely I would say expectation to marry. So the older sisters have married, and Maribel never had children, and Caroline has two daughters being raised in, the perfect world, haha, of Palm Beach.
Yeah.
But the point is that they've really followed the template that's put before so many young women too, or women like, say, 30 onward. And then Raleigh, whose husband is divorcing her, and why is, part of the novel, so I won't mention it. But Raleigh is sort of has sort of failed. And again, there go the judgments. They kick in right away. So Lucinda, because she always wants to be the winner, is working very hard to make sure that Raleigh has the right kind of divorce, one where, she's sort of won the game. But divorce is another way to be shunned. There's so many ways for women to be viewed, and all these just stereotypical applications, whether it's real or not.
Do you, I don't know, I'm looking at around me, and I look in and I see a lot of younger women who are not necessarily getting married. They may have partners that they stay with, and or even live with, but they're not necessarily running to get married and have children. I mean, that has changed, and or is changing, I think.
It's
Yeah.
changing. Part of it is really that these young women are looking at the world and saying what we have heard before, but seems to be more critical now than ever is, what kind of world are we going to bring a child into? It's very complicated right now. And then not feeling so pressured, so pigeonholed, another part of it, to be a mother, to be a wife and mother, which is interesting and very freeing.
Yeah, I think a lot of these women are, I want to maybe get back to, I mean, some of the implications for that or the consequences of that get like having children much later, like late 30s, early 40s. And yeah, because that's very different, let's say, than maybe even 10 years ago. These older parents, older mothers, let's stick to older mothers.
So
What
much,
is,
there's
yeah.
so much more of that, yes. And it used to be that, if you got married too late, if you had kids too late, everyone sort of shook their head. And it's not happening anymore. It's becoming a new norm in a way.
Yeah. Well, I see some of these older mothers who are struggling here again as women, doing everything to having high pressure jobs at the same time trying to nurse their babies in office settings, very often getting depressed, postpartum depression. They're 39, 40 years old and expected to do everything and to do it well. And that's not doesn't seem to be, this is a generalization, but I'd like you to comment it, but doesn't seem to be working out either.
Well, I think that women being overwhelmed by the birth of a child and the shape shifting of their lives has never really, and I looked at this in a few of my nonfiction books, it has never really been honored or respected enough. It goes on a lot, and the system, the work day, well, maybe it's a little better now with home offices, but for so many decades, the workplace system wasn't set up to accommodate mothers of young children. And it's very hard to balance it all. We're still really struggling with that. That
So still
balance.
struggling with it, we're still being judged. Going back to your, that the whole issue of judging.
It's very hard for women. What could be more damning than to be called a bad mother, an ex-wife? Just again, like it just keeps on happening with women. And this is what Lucinda Barrows, my protagonist, is fighting. She's fighting to prevail and for her hard-earned place in Palm Beach society to not be threatened. And yet at the same time, she has a profound secret and she's about to be outed. And then who are her daughters? Because another study I did years ago called Reclaiming Ourselves, How Women Dispel a Legacy of Bad Choices. In that study, I really found that women often, even young women, don't wake up. They're not really awake until a time of great need or sorrow or a time of great success. And that we often just sleepwalk through the very important choices that we make, if they're even choices, or are they just mandated?
And we
Husband,
don't, yeah, and we're not aware of it, is what you're saying. We're making these choices because we're not really in touch with the choices that we're making, or we're just, unless there's a crisis, either positive, yeah.
I'm saying that we believe in a very superficial way, based on my anecdotal qualitative research. We believe that what we're doing is what we're meant to do as the, good girl, good daughter, good wife, good mother, good grandmother. That used to be the trajectory for years. And yet, who are we individually? What do we really yearn for? Why marry if you never really wanted to marry? Or why have children if you didn't want to? Or why not have a child on your own and not worry about? So all of this is changing and improving, yet the old way of looking at things also remains. So it becomes very complicated. It becomes very demanding for women. It should be easier. women should be freer still, I believe, to make decisions that work for them, that don't just follow the paradigm.
Do you think it's in the DNA of our society?
I think yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think that it comes from very old and yet not discarded ex expectations or norms, or just, I mean, are we better than when, say, my mother went to college and she was told to come home with an MRS? Yes, I think we're better off than that. But are we really there yet? I'm not so certain. As I said, it's about equal pay for equal work, but it's about real equality across the board. There should be more women politicians. There should be more women running companies. Lucinda Barros in this novel, she's afraid to admit that she runs the company, because most of the women where she lives in Palm Beach are more, socialites. They're not working. They're going to golf and lunch and cards. And that's very satisfying. I'm not judging, I'm reporting. But for Lucinda, this company she's sort of secretly built is very, very essential to her. Very important.
I think that's an important point with Lucinda in the book, obviously, but I think that's a very kind of common behavior when women become I'm saying too successful. They don't want to admit to it. They downplay it. They hide it. They hide their successes. As you say, Lucinda Barros, the main character in your book, I think that's an issue that women struggle with every day.
They do, and women feel really beholden to how they'll be viewed. So, as I was saying before, are you a good mother? Oh, you have a career, but look at all the women who put their careers aside. A lot of young women are doing that now, Kathryn, when they have children. And that's because, again, it hasn't been a friendly environment for women to do the balancing act. And that second shift, the proverbial second shift that was talked about with the second wave of feminism years ago, that, where women came home and from their jobs, maybe they even earned more than their husbands. And here they are, still doing the laundry, still making the lunchbox for the next morning, still the one to do it all, while the husbands weren't expected to do as much. Now, based again on my research, on the role of wife, I've written 3 books on the role of wife in America. I think that the husbands today, starting with the millennials or even the not boomers for sure, but after that they're starting to pitch in more, and there is more sharing of family. But it's been a long time, and working hard to get that to be recognized.
Yeah, and I think it did start with began with the baby boomers, with men changing diapers, maybe, I don't know, but the whole the whole issue of, and maybe this is for another show, of competitiveness and being embarrassed by or not willing to show that you're, as a woman being, that you are competitive and that you are successful is a big issue.
And actually, there's so much competition among women in any town, anywhere, but in Palm Beach, it's really, really a part of daily life.
Yeah.
So there's that too, who has what, who has the most
The most and the best and the biggest and the beautiful
house, the best child, the best, tennis game. It really happens, but it happens across all echelons.
We only have a couple minutes left, so we do want our listeners to get the book, Palm Beach Confidential. Susanna Marin is the author. And okay, Susanna, so tell us where I suppose we can purchase the book anywhere, right? On Audible too?
Amazon is great. It's
Yeah.
definitely available on Amazon. Your bookstore has it or will order it. And I love to hear from readers. So, social media. I am on Instagram, and I have a website and Facebook. So anyway, anyone wants to reach out to me, that would be great.
Great. And you're very successful. And that's okay, right?
Thank you.
Yes. Susanna Marin, Palm Beach Confidential is the name of the book. And thanks so much for being on the show today. I always enjoy our conversation. Yes.
It's so great to be with you. Thank you.
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you've been listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.